This week we kind of come to the end of our mini-series of encountering the resurrected Jesus, and it's been good to look at some of those accounts from Scripture that detail some of those first resurrection appearances. And today we're going to look at that passage that we referred to in the latter portion of that video there from John 21:1-17 that details Jesus' appearance to some of the disciples while they're out fishing, with that particular focus on Peter. And this third encounter for Peter comes following a time of great failure. And if you're honest, failure is something that we're all familiar with. Failure is something that we're all familiar with. Be it a test that we failed, a driving exam that we failed. Any kind of second-time passes here this morning? A few hands constantly going up, relationship failure, moral failure, maybe kind of breaking of habit failures, just something else. But within this story, and actually within these failures, we actually see Jesus lovingly extend favour and fellowship and forgiveness, and something which each one of us here needs. And so we're going to track those themes as we explore this passage and encounter Jesus afresh this morning. So if you've got your Bibles or your devices with you, you can turn with me to John. We've got a piece of fluff that's not alive on there this morning. Anything else for anyone here? You changed that. Reading from John 21. Verses 1-17. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, and it says this. Later, Jesus again appeared to his disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, as you might say, that's the same sea, it's just a different way of saying it. This is how it happened. 7 disciples were Simon Peter, Thomas nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 of his disciples. Simon Peter says, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing there on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said to them, "Throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic for his strips of work, he jumped into the water and headed to shore. The others stayed in the boat and pulled the loaded net to shore, for they were only 100 yards or so from shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. "Bring some of your fish you just caught," Jesus said. So Simon Peter went and dragged the net to shore, and there were 153 large fish, and yet the net had not torn. "Now come and have some breakfast," Jesus said. And none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They just knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus served them bread and fish. This is the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to his disciples since he'd been raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied, "you know that I love you. And feed my lambs," he said. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said, "you know that I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. The 3rd time, he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question the 3rd time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep." Such a beautiful and such a restorative passage. This would be the 3rd time that Jesus encounters Peter and the other disciples, and each encounter had been informative and encouraging for them. And you can imagine it was a big thing to take in. You kind of saw some of that kind of graphic in the imagery, just the wonder in that video that we just watched, to take in the reality of the Jesus who had risen from the dead, that had encountered him, and had been bigger for some of the baggage that they carried. And while Peter was the bold and often outspoken one amongst the disciples, it's often him that you hear speaking on behalf of the disciples in the Gospels. He's known as impetuous Peter by some because of his brashness and his boldness, his incredible statements and confessions of faith that Jesus, you are the Messiah. Great leaps of faith in stepping out of the boat and following Jesus onto the water. And yet Peter also felt the weight of failure. And I wonder what weights of failure that you feel too this morning. See, on the night when Jesus needed him the most, 3 times Peter couldn't stay awake praying with Jesus. 3 times Jesus goes back to him and finds him asleep on the job. When trouble came and the guards came to arrest Jesus in the garden, following a brass brush with a sword to hack off the servant's ear, Peter fled with the rest of the disciples. Later, as Jesus is tried before the council 3 times, 3 times before the clock called, Peter denied that he ever knew Jesus. Later, when some of the disciples and the other disciples and the women who went to see Jesus on the cross, the whereabouts of Peter, it isn't mentioned. Under the weight of these failures, maybe Peter didn't dare to show his face. After all, how could he show his face after what he had done? Maybe the things this morning things that you've done, where you felt ashamed to show your face. You felt ashamed of the weight of failure. You didn't want to show your face. You know, sometimes Joseph, as kids do, they make mistakes and do things wrong. And sometimes when he does that, he hides himself in his hoodie or blanket, and he kind of goes to the corner of the couch or the corner of the room, or sometimes his room, and he sticks his hoodie over his head and tucks it inside his hand, or get his blanket and wrap himself in it because he's kind of felt a weight of failure. And he's ashamed, so he's hidden himself from his father, he's hidden himself from his mother or from his sister, he's hidden himself because he feels a sense of shame because he's failed. And we have to go and lovingly seek him out. Sometimes we can do better at doing that, navigating that, but we have to do that as parents. For myself, when I went through a dark time of depression, anxiety, and burnout a few years ago, feeling the weight and the reality of these things, I didn't want to show my face. I didn't even want to walk down the street for fear of seeing anyone, for the weight of shame that I felt. And yet God lovingly sought me out. Even in Peter's faith in the resurrected Jesus, he sought him out 3 times, that we know such is the mercy and the compassion of Jesus. And church, he seeks you out this morning as well. So in this third appearance of Jesus and some of the disciples, Jesus appears to them on the shore of the beach of Lake Galilee, following a long, hard and slow and unproductive night of fishing. And again, you kind of read that line, and they fished all night, and it's like you move on to it in like 0.2 seconds. All night. Okay? 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever, a long time, out on the ocean, out on the waves, dropping in there, casting it again, doing it again, trying every other side of the boat, doing what you can as an experienced fisherman all night long. It was another moment of failure for Peter. It seemed that even what people were supposed to be good at, here he is, this experienced fisherman, he's done it for years, he failed at it. In his failure, his frustration, you can always imagine him thinking, I can't do anything right. I can't do anything right. I've denied him not once, not twice, but 3 times. Instead of following to the end, but I ended up denying him and running off scared. I couldn't even stay awake with him while he prayed. Kept coming back, waking him, asking me, encouraging me, pleading him to stay awake, praying, and I couldn't even do him that. And to top it all off now, I'm a fisherman and I can't even fish. I'm a failure. What a failure am I? I don't know if you've ever been caught in a spiral of doom that sucks the life out of you. Where circumstances seem to get harder and harder, your ability to cope gets less and less as failure and perceived failure leads to frustration, and frustration leads to failure until the cycle continues and sucks you down. I've been there a few times in my life, and I have to consciously fight against it by the grace of God. And yet in those moments, and in our failure, Jesus lovingly meets us. Jesus lovingly meets us. See, maybe Peter had gone fishing because that's what he knew to do. He'd spent, the whole of his adolescent life, his working life, in and out of boats, hauling in fish, and he had to do something to process these events, to take his mind off of his failures, off of things that he's been doing. Maybe in the back of the mind, he knew that it was last while he was fishing that he first encountered Jesus. Maybe he knew that it was last while he was last fishing that he first encountered Jesus. In some way, that memory brought some measure of comfort and hope to him. In church, there's a lesson for us there. It's for us to be mindful of. Be mindful of the times that we previously encountered Jesus. Be mindful of the times that we've encountered him, remembering your history with God. Remembering his faithfulness to you, what he's done and how he's encountered you in your life, how he's brought help and hope and healing and deliverance in different ways. Because actually remembering that history and in remembering that encounter, it actually reminds us of what is possible again in Christ. It reminds us of what's possible. When you read through Scripture, the amount of time it tells them to listen, remember what I've done, remember my word, remember my promises, remember my love to you, because it's in remembering that we're stirred afresh to remind ourselves of what God has once done, his faithfulness to us, his hope that he's previously brought in our life. It might feel like we've got none right now, but he's previously done it, and he can do it again. It reminds us again of what is possible once more. Maybe this morning some of you need to remember intentionally afresh what Jesus has done for you, to remember your history with God, to go back to those moments when you encountered the grace and the love and the mercy of God, to encounter them afresh, to go back to those moments and encounter them afresh. Let them remind you of what was once possible is again possible with God. It's another moment of failure for Peter. Jesus, that he appears to him and he shows him favour and he shows him fellowship. He shows him favour as he instructs him where to fish, and fellowship as he welcomes him for breakfast by the fire. And I just love that. I love that, Jesus. Absolutely love it. In Peter's weakness and in his failure, that Jesus shows him favour. And he shows him fellowship. Does not exclude him, but he welcomes him. He invites him to come. And initially Peter didn't know that it was Jesus, but he was willing to give it a go. In one last ditch attempt, they cast the net on the other side of the boat, and to their surprise they ended up hauling in a huge catch of fish. You can imagine, remember, this is all night long. And just imagine that sense of relief, of joy, of wonder, of bewilderment, of amazement that they had as they finally haul in this catch. A silly example, but have you ever tried to open a jar that is just stuck for love nor money? You know, be it a bottle of pop or kind of like whatever, you kind of go, you're trying to like, you grab it, you've got every single device that is known to man, you've got your towel on it, you've got those kind of like, you know, what the Tupperware device that you stick on top and clamp them down, you're trying to like grab on and grip on and untie that bad boy, and will not budge for love nor money. And then you finally say to someone, listen, can you like, you know, someone says, do you want me to give you a hand? And you're like, it's not coming off at all, and they grab it, no devices, and they twist it and it's off. And you're like, come on man. You know, it must be all the hard work I put before, but it's a little bit like that for the disciples where they've been doing everything they know how. These guys are experienced fishermen, they know what to do, they know the tricks of the trades, they know everything possible, they know the devote, they know what to do. And yet even in that they failed. Sometimes no matter how good we are or think we are, we fail. How much effort we put in, how much determination we put in something, we fail at things. And in this moment, Jesus shows them favour. It actually shows them, listen, chuck your nets over the right side. And as they give this one last ditch attempt, boom, the top comes off, and they find the fish. Such is the favour of God, even in our failure. John, the beloved disciple who recognises that it's Jesus and tells Peter. And again, there's a lesson here to learn that not only is that those who are close to Jesus, who sit at his feet or who lean back on his chest like the beloved, so to speak, will recognise him from afar. But actually, more importantly, that they point others to Jesus. That John, knowing that it was Jesus, actually he didn't just get in the way and jump in and say this and get away. He kind of knew where he was at. And he pointed him towards Jesus. He didn't get in the way, but he made a way pointing Peter to Jesus. I wonder how and to whom that you and I can lovingly point other people to Jesus to encourage them. In what ways maybe each of us being pointed to Jesus by others where we need to take that initiative and follow. You know, Peter could have sat there and sulked in the boat after hearing that. Oh, it's Jesus again. All that weight of that failure, that bit behind the favour that Jesus showed him, he could have sulked in the boat. But hearing that it's Jesus, he jumps in the water and he swims in. He must be in the right state, because I don't know if you know, he's stripped for work, okay, and then what's he do? He puts his clothes back on, okay, and then jumps in the water. And I don't know if you ever tried swimming with clothes on, but it's really not the easiest thing to do in the world. It's bad enough like when you've got you chocolate water, but you've got these, if I went in this it'd be difficult, but if you imagine you've got like these long kind of flowing garments, like just get sodding with water. It's not the most simplest thing to do yet. It must have been such a state of confusion. Oh, money's like, I'm coming to Jesus. And he just dives in and splashes around it and gets to him. He swims to Jesus. Peter had a choice to sit and to soak or to swim to Jesus. Actually, we too, we have a choice in the failures and the things that we face. To soak. To soak because it's not going my way. To soak in that spiral. Or to jump and to swim towards Jesus. And Peter swims and he meets Jesus sitting around the fire, cooking fish and bread for breakfast. And after hauling the net revealed they sit eating around the fire. Jesus has shown him favour and he's shown him fellowship as he invites him close. And so after breakfast, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Different ways, different nuances that people read in different things, but it's just, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And this is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. It's this threefold repeating question from Jesus. Do you love me? 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? It's given 3 opportunities for Peter to affirm his love for Jesus, which brings forgiveness and restoration to those 3 demands. See, when Jesus asked Peter, it's not so much for Jesus' sake, listen, tell me you love me, I need to be affirmed, big me up. He's asking him for Peter's sake, for Peter to know that he truly does love Jesus. It's as if each time as Peter responds to Jesus, this weight of failure is kind of cast off. This weight of failure is removed, and almost this spiral of doom that has been descending down and down and down in. That each time that he affirmed Jesus, you know that I love you. That spiral of doom begins to reverse. And it begins to send up, and Jesus again says, Peter, feed my lambs. And he goes up as he's affirmed by Jesus, and again, do you love me? Lord, you know that I love you. And feed my sheep. And he spirals out, another weight is taken up, and then again, Lord, Peter, do you love me? Jesus. And it says that at this point that he's grieved, he's hurt, he's finally hit home. He shut out his emotions, so he just finally hit home. Lord, you know all things. In my weakness, in my failure, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. And again, Jesus declares, and feed my sheep. And again, affirmed this reversal of this spiral of doom. This casting off of these weights of failure that has just weighed him down. It's a loving affirmation by Jesus that Peter's not only restored publicly, but he's recommissioned. He's not just restored personally, but he's recommissioned publicly. And he's restored publicly. But if there were doubts by the other disciples, he thought, you know what, he really did blow it into. He really did mess up 3 times here, 3 times there, proper failure. If there's any doubts by them, listen, he was affirmed by Jesus. Those doubts were cast aside as Jesus affirmed Peter. You know that Peter would go on to be that rock and that pillar of strength within the early church, walking in faithfulness and boldness like never before. Tradition would have it that Peter would be crucified for his faith, not counting himself worthy to die in the same way of the Lord, and that he was crucified upside down. Peter knew what it was to fail, to be a failure. But he also knew what it was to encounter the favour, the fellowship and the forgiveness of Jesus. And as we draw to a close this morning, I wonder what weights of failure are holding you down? What weights of failure do you feel that just hinder you, your walk with the Lord this morning, that hinder you in the things that God has for you? Are there any spirals of doom that maybe you're caught in this morning? You begin to wind down. You might not be in the lowest depths of it, but you know you're winding down that way. Jesus is lovingly seeking each one out this morning. He's giving the invitation to his favour, for his fellowship and his forgiveness, but he wants a response this morning. And so as Rachel comes and plays, and as we move into a time of reflection, worship, I just want to lead us in a prayer. And again, I want to give some space for God to remove some weights as we wait. To reverse maybe some of the spirals of our thinking. And that negative spiral that we can so easily fall into. And I don't know what your failures are this morning. I don't know how big it feels in your mind, how heavy it weighs upon your heart, or upon those around you, but I know that listen, Jesus wants to lovingly encounter each once more. He wants to reverse that spiral of guilt. He wants to take off all the weights of shame. He wants to show you favour even in failure. He wants to extend his fellowship and his forgiveness afresh this morning. And so maybe as we close our eyes, if you come to that this morning, as we wait again on him, just be honest with the Lord and where you're at this morning. A response that we can just maybe sit and sulk, so to speak, in the boat, or we can swim to Jesus. Father, I pray that where there are weights that are weighing people down this morning, Lord, weights will be cast off. Father, I pray that where people are spiraling this morning, that we begin to spiral upwards and to picture yourself on the beach, maybe in that boat, and just invite you to hear the words of Jesus to come. Come as you are. Come sit by the fire with me. There's warmth, this relationship, this friendship, this fellowship that Jesus is inviting us to. Maybe just picture yourself walking and sitting beside that fire with Jesus. It may be a bit nervous because you feel the weight of our shame. Feel the depths of that spiral. And Jesus is lovingly calling you to fellowship. To extend his favour to you, to sit with him in this moment. And just hear the words of Jesus this morning. Do you love me? He's not saying it to condemn. He wants you to know the reality of his love for you. Do you love me? Do you love me? And just respond to him this morning. He knows those ways. As you just do that, just feel those waves drop off as he affirms you, as you affirm your love for him, as he extends forgiveness to you, as you offer it to him. I want to declare to you this morning there's no thing that's going through your mind that it has not paid the price for. That it has not cleansed as we come to him in Jesus. And as you come to him, even in failure, he welcomes you and he cleanses you. And for each one of you, there is a job to do that he has for you. Might look different than the job that he had for Peter, but he still has a role for each one of you. And so Jesus, I'll just again pray, Lord, for that removal, that washing off of those weights of shame, and that lifting up of our faces into your face, that spiraling upwards in your presence, in your love, in your grace. Thinking that your grace goes into the depths of our being, the depths of our sin and our shame, and lifts us to the heights of your presence. Thank you, Lord, that in our failure you offer favour, you offer fellowship, you offer forgiveness. We want to say yes and respond to all those things.